Listen, do you want to know a secret? Do you promise not to tell? This is definitely on Her Majesty's not-so-secret service. But the government might be about to sign off on a bid that allows a Chinese telecoms giant to effectively run much of our 5G network. This is not so much communist Reds under the bed. They'll be everywhere, from our cars to kitchens and bathrooms to boudoirs, courtesy of the most questionable of decisions by Prime Minister Theresa May. There's been one hell of a who Huawei done it row over precisely who leaked details of a highly confidential National Security Council meeting that discussed this. Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson even suffered his very own skyfall. He lost his job as a suspected culprit. What a load of thunderballs. This is a story of massive public interest that affects the security of every one of us. We've a right to know. And this was a case of journalists doing what journalists are put on earth to do. Put simply, this was a licence to spill the beans.
Nick, if it wasn't such a serious topic, I mean, that was amazing, that was hilarious. Look, there's a few angles to this. First of all, of course, as a broadcaster, I agree with you. And it's vital that information like this gets to the public. There's a clear public interest. I think it meets any threshold when it comes to that test. It's certainly in the public's interest to know if the Chinese state will have some form of advantage over the privacy of our lives, especially considering what they're doing in China. Now, some viewers may watch the Black Mirror TV show. There's an episode about the social credit system where a totalitarian state uses social media to control the lives of its citizens and punish them for misbehaviour. And indeed, that's what China is doing. And so it's scary if China has a foothold in our tech and in our country. And regarding that, I have to wonder what Theresa May is thinking as Prime Minister. I was saying to you earlier, I think the term lame duck may not necessarily suffice, because the way she's handled this, the way that she seems to be going against intelligence advice in making this decision, I think it would be more appropriate to describe her as a drunk driving duck rather than just a lame
well,
duck.
indeed.
The last thing I'll say very quickly is I think that there is a question about the Official Secrets Act, and I think that though whoever leaked this probably did the country a favour, they probably do need to be disciplined for another reason, and that's the precedent of the Official Secrets Act must not be broken.
Let's get Michelle in. And just to say, Gavin Williamson, of course, denied that he's the source of the leak, although he has paid for it, as I said, with his job. The key here, Michelle, is, of course, cabinets leak. They've always leaked. This is probably the leakiest of all cabinets, but this is the National Security Council, where you would be allowed to think that you could discuss the most sensitive details. So I still say it's in the national interest, even though it's the national security. Do you?
So a cabinet is one thing, a colander is another, and I am absolutely fed up with the politicians letting us down, betraying trust, not actually doing their job. So if you are on the National Security Council, you have to be able to maintain confidentiality. It's just an absolute basic and a given, because our safety is in your hands if you're on that committee. So I think it's appalling that a leak of any nature would come from that particular committee.
Really?
I think if there is concerns, i.e. you're getting into bed with someone that you shouldn't be getting into, in this case this Chinese corporation, then you confine it into that room, you have your conversations, you do your role, you have your responsibilities, and you push back in the confines of that environment and make your voice heard.
What if you lose?
Well, then that's a different question for a point further down the line, and there should be some kind of policy and some kind of way of raising your concerns. I'm fed up with politicians running to the newspapers every 5 minutes, is what it feels like, in order to, whether it's score points, whether it's undermining, and I think it's absolutely wrong. And if we think, if we look at the Official Secrets Act for a second, and look at this, it's a criminal offence to obtain or publish any information from a serving or former member of the security and intelligence services, or from certain categories of civil servants where that disclosure would be damaging. There is no public interest debate. So what I would say is this undermines, to me, the confidential nature of that committee and how freely people should be able to speak in those meetings without the fear of one of them running off to the nearest press.
Carol, I'm going to come to you because you're a journalist, so I think I know where you are, and I do want to hear it in a moment.
But I want, anyway.
June, I'm interested where you are on this.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick, and then I'll yield to Carol. I agree with you. I completely accept Michelle and Majid's point regarding the Official Secrets Act, but I think we need to make allowances for whistleblowers. And the question that we should be asking, which is why I have no idea what Theresa May is thinking, is would the reverse be possible? Would the Chinese allow us to install their 5G?
I think you know the answer.
I doubt it very much.
Come on, Jono.
I understand that Westminster journalism is run by leaks and off-the-record briefings. I get that. But this is entirely different. This was a leak from a national security thing. And the problem here is that what's at stake is the capacity of the security services to give information in secret and for it to be leaked. Gavin Williamson has got form for leaks. You know that when he's in cabinet.
He denies it here.
Well, he might deny it, but we were told last night, and it was on the news, that Theresa May had compelling evidence. It might not be him, it might be someone in his office. But what I think I know for a fact, and even being a journalist, and had I got this story, I would have absolutely done it and been happy to have done it. However, it doesn't stop me thinking that the cabinet minister who leaked it should not only be sacked but should be prosecuted, because had a civil servant done it.
Well, we don't know it's a cabinet minister.
Okay, but if it was
there are others at the meeting.
But if it was a civil servant who done it, he definitely would be prosecuted. So why, if it turns out to be Gavin Williamson, why not him?
Though it does behoove us to remember that many an abuse of human rights has been committed in the name of national security. And whether that was at Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo and other places, especially Abu Ghraib, the spectre of national security being raised to silence people from criticising what's being done in the name of our protection is constantly something that journalists, I think, do need to push back.
You understand that the security services have to be able to give advice at the highest level.
I already concede that the leaker should be punished, but I do think there's a public interest in this knowledge being made public.
As a non-journalist, can I ask you a question as a journalist? So in this situation, so if somebody's leaked from this, highly confidential forum to a newspaper, isn't there a law that obligates that newspaper to disclose the source?
Ultimately, the editor could, when you read that, ultimately the editor and the journalist involved could face prosecution. You have to weigh up two things. You have to, your defence, which I think would, whoever has leaked this, I think you would be able to prove this is in the public interest. And that actually, that would allow newspapers, believe it or not, to hack, to do whatever they like, if it is in the public interest. So that's the measure. The other thing you have to do is national security. Now, the government is able to serve what's called a D notice, which stops publication. But Michelle, I guarantee...
That's not my question. My question is, we need to understand who this leak is from the perspective of confidentiality.
Yes.
Now, rather than wandering around doing investigations and all the rest of it, isn't it just as simple as Theresa May going to the editor of this newspaper and saying...
You never give up your sources.
And this is my question.
But
isn't there a legality when it comes to something such as this, the severity?
No, because then you're living in a police state.
Just on a matter
the editor
of law,
would go to jail.
Folks, on a technicality,
you never give up your sources.
I find
on a
that
matter of law, I don't think
fascinating.
you can't hack for public interest, because that's committing a criminal offence.
Sorry, OK, but you can take other measures that would allow you...
You could receive somebody who's done that. You could receive their information.
But you can't give up your source, because you never be
on the source point, I think there's another principle at stake here, and that applies to lawyers as well, Michelle. If you're worried about intelligence officers having the confidence in the national security to be able to speak without their words being leaked, you've got other systems at play. Lawyers need to be able to hear testimony from the suspect without being forced to reveal that testimony against attorney-client privilege. Journalists have a similar thing where if you break that taboo, if you go into there and say you've got to give us your source, the entire profession of journalism stalls. You can't work like that.
But don't you think... So I was just going to say, don't you think that this is indicative of the government we have now? This has never happened before, ever, to my knowledge, anyway. And isn't it indicative that we have Theresa May, we have a government in charge where we have a load of ministers and politicians who think they can do whatever the hell they like?
And clearly she's lost control of her cabinet. Just one quick point, and I'm not bringing this back to Brexit, I promise you.
God.
But I do...
Please don't.
No, I think you'll agree with me. I do think that, if we are looking to leave the EU, then surely it makes sense for us to be giving these sorts of contracts to British companies so that we know we're creating jobs in this country. So not just in terms of national security, out of self-interest, you would think.
A drunk driving duck. That's what
makes no sense.
I'm just pleased it's taken this long for the B word to be mentioned, and it hasn't been in before. But fair play to Theresa May, by the way. She's actually shown an element of leadership for once in terms of accurately, quickly firing someone. But anyway, coming up next on The Pledge, I'm saying we need to support all members of society.